So if you remember, I said that Esther is trying to manipulate the situation. And I will show you that she does it in 3 stages. It's called suspense, suspicion, manipulation. Okay, this is her plan. Okay, as I told you, this shy, unassuming woman now turns into this femme fatale who is going to turn around the kingdom, and somebody is going to die on the way. Okay, this is very dramatic Persian cultural story. She's going to turn around the kingdom, she's going to win, she's going to have her way, and somebody always dies on the way. So it's quite dramatic. So let's watch how this develops. You'll see it goes from suspense, suspicion, manipulation. So it's like this. Thank you. Okay, so let's. Okay. Okay. So Esther chapter 5. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, facing the king's palace while the king was sitting in his royal throne, in the throne facing the entrance of the palace. And when the king sees Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. The king extended to Esther the royal scepter. Now, as I said, what's the 3rd day? It's the 3rd day of the fast. Remember, everybody's fasting for 3 days. And she is now taking a very big risk. As she told Mordechai, I was not called to the king's palace for 30 days. And if he does not show that scepter, then I get the death penalty, and he can't change the edict because it's a royal edict. So that's his one chance to show me amnesty if he shows that scepter. The king saw Esther waiting in the court. She won his favor. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter, and Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. So the king obviously gives her amnesty. I'm saying obviously. But when he says, what troubles you, Queen Esther? What's your request up to half the kingdom? He realizes that Esther just risked her life, right? Esther just risked her life. And the question is now, why? So Esther replied, if it pleases your majesty, let your majesty and Haman come to the feast that I have prepared for him. Now, as I said last time, this is the suspense, okay? What is going on here? You have Esther just risked her life. The king saved her by showing the scepter. Now he's waiting to hear what the problem is. Obviously, it must be something very grave and very serious. And Esther says, oh, I just wanted to invite you and Haman to a party I'm having tomorrow night. Is that okay? So this is creating suspense because Achashverosh knows that nobody risks their life for a party. Not even if you're a diehard Tel Avivan, are you going to risk your life for a party? Even if you're a Nachlaot diehard, you wouldn't do that. So, I mean, what is going on here? Okay, so the king is playing along. Obviously, she has to do it her way. Fine, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. So the king commanded, tell Haman to hurry, do Esther's bidding, and Esther and Haman came to the feast. Obviously, she has to do it her way. It's something really serious. I will give her. But the king is in suspense. At the wine feast, the king said, Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted. What's your request? Even half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. My wish, replied Esther. My request? If your majesty will do me the favor, if it pleases your majesty to grant my wish and accede to my request, let your majesty and Haman come to the feast which I will prepare, and tomorrow I'll tell you my bidding. Now, Haman is very happy because he's now palsy-walsy with the queen and the king. So that day Haman went out lighthearted, and when Haman saw Mordechai, who didn't even rise, Haman was full with rage, but he controlled himself. It was a good day. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh, And he told them about his wealth and his sons and how the king promoted him and advanced him. And what's more, Queen Esther gave a feast, and besides the king, she only wanted me. And tomorrow I'm invited by her also with the king. And all this means nothing every time I see that Mordechai, the Jew, sitting in the palace. And his wife Zeresh and the friend said, let a stake be put up 50 cubits high, and in the morning tell the king to hang him. Here it says impale him, but actually in Hebrew it says to hang him. Impale him, that's something very specific. Then go to the galley with the king to the feast, and the proposal pleased Haman, and he put up the stake. So Haman is being fooled in the sense that he thinks that he's not palsy-walsy with the queen and the king. But the king is the suspense is now turned into suspicion. The king goes home and says, Esther risked her life, and all she wanted was a stupid party. That's not possible. That is not possible. And then he said, let's try to figure this out. We just had a toast tonight with the three strongest people in this empire: the king, me, the queen, and my number one commander in chief, Haman. The three strongest people in the empire. Now, Esther's not telling me something. And obviously, if she risked her life, it's really bothering her. There's some secret that Esther knows 100%. Does Haman know too? Am I the only one who doesn't know? Haman looked really cheerful tonight. So I noticed that smile on his face as he was leaving, and that smirk. Do Esther and Haman know something that I'm the only one left out? At that point, the suspense turns into suspicion. And in chapter 6, that night, sleep deserted the king. He couldn't sleep. He ordered the books of the records, the annals, to be brought to the king, and he found that Mordechai had denounced Bigtana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who wanted to assassinate Achashverosh. In other words, he's looking to see, maybe there's somebody who doesn't like me that I'm forgetting. And maybe they banded up with that person who doesn't like me. Okay. So Achashverosh is getting really nervous. And we have here the, what's the term? Right, the fear of the unknown is happening here. What honor advancements have been conferred to Mordechai in this? Oh, the man says, nothing, replied the servant. Who's in the court, the king said. Well, Haman had just entered the outer court to speak to the king because he wanted to hang Mordechai. Oh, it's Haman standing in the court, they said. Okay, let him come in. Haman entered, the king said, what should be done for a person who the king desires his honor? Of course, Haman thinks that's obviously me. I was just invited to a feast. So Haman said, for the man the king honored, let him have royal garb that the king wore, and a horse that the king rode on, and a royal diadem, let it be on his head like a crown. And put the attire on the horse and let him go through, paraded through the city square and say, this is the man that the king desires to honor. Okay, so Achashverosh says, good idea. Do all that to Mordechai and take him through the city exactly like you propose. So Haman took the garb and the horse and arrayed Mordechai, etc. Of course, Haman thought it was himself. Now, before I continue, remember, the king is still in suspicion. He's wondering whether Haman and Esther know something that he doesn't about a plot, and they're not telling him about it. So, and not only that, what did the king say? King said to Haman, what would you do to honor somebody? And what did Haman say? Oh, let him wear the royal robes and a crown. The king's now thinking, why did Haman say that? He didn't know who I was going to honor. Maybe he thought I was going to honor him. Does he really want to wear the crown and the royal robes? Understand what I'm saying? So the king is now getting very paranoid. The suspense turned into suspicion. Now he doesn't know who to trust. which is exactly what Esther wants. Because what Esther realizes is the only way to create a division and an ultimate separation between the king and Haman is by creating a breach of trust. Because from the king's point of view, Haman can do whatever he wants in that kingdom as long as the king sits on the throne. But the only thing he needs from Haman is trust. And if there's a breach of trust, that's the end of everything. And Haman just said he wouldn't mind wearing the crown, wouldn't mind wearing the robe. That's not good. So Haman said to Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends, and they said to him, look, if Mordechai, before whom you have begun to fall, if he's from the Jews, you'll continue to fall. Okay, that sounds like a narrative written by a Jew. Right? But the point is, and while they're speaking to him, the king's eunuchs arrived and brought Haman to the banquet. Now, banquet number 2. The king is sweating. Haman is sweating, okay? Because Mordechai was just, and they're sitting at that table, and everybody is now, right? And now their thoughts are racing in their mind. The king is wondering who's plotting against him. And what do Haman and Esther know that I don't know? And Haman is thinking, what just happened that made the king value Mordechai over me, right? What plot is going on that I don't know about? And the only one who really knows what's going on is, what's the answer?
Esther.
Esther is the only one who really knows what's going on. That's called the manipulation. So we went from suspense, suspicion, now starts the manipulation. Even at the end of the story, only Esther will actually know what happened. Neither Haman, who will be on his way to the gallows, or even the king. Let's continue. So Esther replied, okay, on the second day, the king said to Esther, what's your wish, Esther? And it will be granted. What's your request? Even half the kingdom. So Esther said, if your majesty will do the favor, and if it pleases your majesty, let my life be granted to me as my wish, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, my people and myself, to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. If we had only been bondmen and bondwomen, I would have kept silent, for it's not worth it to trouble the king for such petty things. Now, Achashverosh is wondering, what? Who is doing this? Okay, who is he and who dared do this, said Achashverosh. Esther says, the adversary, the enemy, the evil Haman. And Haman cringed in terror before the king and the queen. Now Achashverosh, as we say in Hebrew, ha'asimon nafal. Now he figures out everything. The light bulb just turned on. Why was it? Remember, he's suspicious, he's paranoid. He's looking for the person who wants to assassinate him, and Esther's pointing the finger at Haman, and now it all makes sense. Haman wanted the crown, Haman wanted the royal robes, and Haman told him about some people which are no good, which he wants to create a royal edict to kill these people, without telling him that people happens to be Esther's people. Which means that the whole story of killing the people was not about the people, it was get to Esther. And why does Haman want to kill Esther? Because he wants to get to the king. You see what's happening in the mind of Achashverosh? It's all logical. The one thing I wanted from Haman was trust, a major breach of trust. He wants to be the king. That's why he wants to kill the queen. That's obvious. So he is furious. The king in his fury left the wine feast from the palace, while Haman remained to plead with Queen Esther for his life, because Haman has no clue what's going on. And he saw that the king had wanted to destroy him. And even though Esther said this, Haman thinks now the king and the queen are plotting against him. And the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet room, and Haman was lying on the couch with Esther. And the king said, oh, you want to lie with my queen in my palace? No sooner did he say the words on the king's lips when Haman's face was covered with shame. And then, to make things worse, one of the servants, Charvona, who seems to know everything, that's why the Talmud says he must have been Elijah, because how did he know everything? This Charvona pops out of nowhere, one of the eunuchs, and is bold enough to say, what's more, there's a tree standing at Haman's house 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordechai in order to hang him on. The king hears that. Wow, the man who saved my life in this first assassination plot, that's the guy they want to kill? Okay, that's finished. Esther's right. Haman is the man. 100%. We have all the evidence now. Okay, so Charvona, that third party, he's the one who makes all the stakes against Haman. So they hung Haman on the stake that he made for Mordechai, and the king's fury abated. And who's the only one who really knows what happened? Esther. But Haman is gone, and Achashverosh is happy with, he got rid of the guy who he suspected to try to do treason. Chapter 8. That very day, Achashverosh gave the property of Haman to the Jews, the enemy of Jews, to Esther. And Mordechai was presented to the king because Esther revealed that he was her uncle. And the king slipped off his ring, gave it to Haman, which he had given to Haman, gave it to Mordechai, because look, he saved my life. He's obviously somebody who I can trust, and he's related to the queen. He's not going to try to kill the queen or me. So, Akol Beseder, as we say in Hebrew, everything's okay. Esther spoke to the king again, falling on her feet and beseeching him to avert the evil decree of Haman the Agagi. And the king extended the golden scepter to Esther, meaning she goes again to the palace. And Esther arose and stood before the king, and obviously he knows it's something else serious. And she says, if it pleases your majesty, send dispatches to counter the decree that was written by Haman to annihilate the Jews. But if you remember, I said this before, in Persian law, you cannot cancel a royal decree. And then she says, how could I bear the disaster that would fall on my people, the destruction of my kindred? Then Achashverosh said to the queen and Mordechai, I have given Haman's property to Esther. He has been hung on the stake. You can write whatever you want to the Jews as you see fit, but whatever the king's name is and seal is on, that edict cannot be revoked. And that is, by the way, Persian law. They're not making it up. So the king's scribes were summoned on the 23rd day of the third month, the month of Sivan. And the letters were written at Mordechai's dictate to the Jews and to the governors and the satraps and the officials, etc., and everybody in their languages. And they wrote in the name of Achashverosh. And what does it say? The king has permitted the Jews of every city to assemble and fight for their lives. Alan, this is what I was saying on Purim. The Jews are allowed, la'amod al hasham, they're allowed to defend themselves. What does it mean, fight for their lives? Because the original edict allows those who don't like the Jews to arm themselves with weapons, fight the Jews, and take the spoils. So the Jews are allowed to stand up for their lives. If any people or province attacks them, they may destroy, massacre, and exterminate the armed forces, together with women and children, and plunder their possessions. By the way, we'll see in the end that they don't plunder anything. Uva biza lo shalchot yadam. They were smart enough to know not to do it. On a single day in all the provinces of Achashverosh, on the 13th day of the 12th month, that's the month of Adar. So, edict number 1 was for the 13th of Adar. Edict number 2 was for the 13th of Adar. Edict number 1 was anybody who wants to fight the Jews can legally get armed and have weapons. Edict number 2, the Jews are also allowed to get armed and defend themselves. As you can imagine, probably most people decided to stand down. Why should I fight somebody who's got a weapon? But you always have the diehards, the Ku Klux Klan or whatever it is, the diehards, who are not going to stop for that. And they're still thinking, I was going to get his car, I was going to get his house, and who is this good for nothing anyhow? The text of the document was to be issued as a law in the single province, was to be publicly displayed, so the Jews be ready for that day to avenge themselves. Again, it's not perpetrated by the Jews, it's a reaction to what they know is going to happen. Mordechai left the king's presence in royal robes with a magnificent crown of gold, and the city of Shushan rang with joyous cries. Do you know what that means, by the way? Why was the city of Shushan so happy? When we read it in the synagogue, we think that it means the Jews were happy. That's not what it says. It says the people of Shushan were happy. When you have a dictator like Haman, nobody likes them. As soon as the people of Shushan, by the way, which is the capital city where all the aristocrats are, realized that the king got rid of Haman, they breathed a sigh of relief and were really joyous because everybody couldn't stand his guts. So the joy that ran out of Shushan was not the joy from the Jews. It was the joy from the people living in Shushan who hated the guts of this Haman, this megalomaniac. The Jews are still in despair because they really don't know what's going to happen on the 13th of Adar. It says that the Jews enjoy light and gladness, but the truth is, there's probably a lot of reservation and trepidation. And in every province where the city's command decree, there is gladness and joy among the Jews that they can defend themselves. And many of the people of the land actually hityahadu, which means they translate it as profess to be Jews, meaning they wanted to be Jewish all of a sudden. And on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the king's command and decree were executed. The very day on which the enemies of the Jews were expected to gain their power, the Jews got their enemies in their power. Throughout the provinces, the Jews mustered in their cities to attack those who sought to hurt. And all the officials in all the provinces, the satraps and the governors showed defense to the Jews, which means the police, in this case, helped the Jews defend themselves. Okay, sort of the opposite of a Kristallnacht. So the Jews were allowed to defend themselves, and the officials probably gave them real weapons and showed them what to do, and probably didn't stand so far away because they knew that Mordechai was now the man in command. Because Mordechai was powerful in the palace and his fame was known. So even the police probably stood behind the Jews to make sure they were okay. So the Jews struck at their enemies with swords, slaying and destroying, wreaking havoc upon them. In the fortress of Shushan, they killed 500 men, including the 10 sons of Haman. And then the king said to Esther, by the way, talking about the numbers, in modern mind, we don't like talking about the gory details of numbers. In the mind of antiquity, if you are victorious, you have to show the numbers. Even though today it's very not politically correct, this is not written today. This is written in the Persian Empire. When you show victory, you show slain and you show victors. That's just the way, unfortunately, the world worked. But the slain here were, according to the megillat, in self-defense. So then, again, Achashverosh says to Esther, what else would you like? What's your wish now? The Jews defended themselves. People died. Esther said, well, can the Jews of Shushan, even if the other Jews finished their war on the 14th, can the Jews of Shushan be permitted to act one more day of weapons against those who are attacking them? Why Shushan? Because that's where the aristocracy lives. And can Haman's 10 sons be hung on the stake? It's not impaled, it's a mistake in the translation. And be hung on the stake. And what does that mean? Haman's sons are already on the stake. What is she asking? What is she actually asking? No problem. What she's asking is it possible to leave the sons of Haman on the stake for another day? They were already hung. Please don't take down their bodies today. Let them sit there. Laman Yeru v'yirau, let them sit there another day so that people realize that the authority of Haman and his sons is over. I always compare this to when the Americans attacked Iraq and Saddam Hussein. And in order to show that they won the war, they put a picture of the two dead sons of Saddam Hussein in the Oh, they're giving me more time. Good. They put the picture of the two dead sons of the Saddam Hussein on the front page of every Iraqi newspaper. That's exactly what Esther is requesting from the king at this point. Leave their bodies on that stake for another day so that everybody knows there was a transfer of power and there should be no misunderstanding. So the Jews of Shushan, on the 14th day of Adar, they slew 300 people in Shushan, but they did not lay their hands on the spoils. And the rest of the Jews in the previous day, when they fought for their lives, they killed 75,000 of their foe, but did not put their hands on the spoil, even though it was allowed. Again, this is 75,000 people in a war which takes place in 128 provinces. But again, nobody knows if these are exact numbers or maybe even exaggerated numbers. Again, in antiquity, high numbers was considered a dramatic effect. If they would have said they killed 5, we would have been happy about that today, that it's because we hate hearing about the loss of life. But in antiquity, the loss of life was part of what it meant to have victory. So there was no way you could have written this story differently, even if it happened differently. That's just the narrative of those days. And therefore, they made the 14th day of Adar a day of feasting and merriment. And the Jews of Shushan, of course, because they only finished on the 14th and they rested on the 15th, the 15th became that day of merriment. Okay, so what's going on here? And then, of course, everything turns from one to another. So let's just talk about the plot of Esther. The plot of Esther had 3 stages to it: suspense, suspicion, manipulation. Suspense, not telling the king what she wanted at the beginning, risking her life, and making that act of risking her life something that the king will be create a suspense and what's going on. And you got to wait till tomorrow to find out, not today. You got to come to the party with Haman or else. Suspicion on the same day, second day, when again she's not willing to reveal, and the king starts wondering if maybe Haman and Esther are up to something that he does not know. And then, of course, to make it worse, Haman suggests the royal robes and the crown, which eventually goes to Mordecai. And the king starts thinking maybe that's what he wants. He wants my robe and my crown. And then it continues. He wants to kill Mordecai, but instead, king, of course, and then he finds out. And then Esther says on that second day that it was Haman who wants to kill her. And then the king figures out, Haman lied to me. He said this was a people which was just useless. Turns out that he knew the whole time, which is not true. But Josh thinks that the whole time Haman knew that Esther was a Jewess. So the whole plot was not about that people who nobody cares about, but it's about killing the queen, which means he was trying to take over the monarchy and the throne. The whole thing was a plot against Achashverosh. And then comes Charvona, and Haman wanted to hang Mordecai, and Mordecai, as you know, saved your life. And then he says, okay, that's 100%. Now I know for sure, no doubt in my mind, hang this man, and it's all over. And since you had Haman, the only body left is Mordecai and Esther, and they for sure are not going to tell what happened. So this is a perfect manipulation, which would make any Agatha Christie or Poirot murder scheme and sensational book. So really, you can see the plot. It's very simple in 3 stages, and all the pieces fall together. Of course, they have to. And then the Jews are able to stand up for themselves. The one downside is when the king explains to them he's not allowed to change the edict. Esther didn't think that would be a problem, but they found another way to do it by having the Jews defend themselves and having police stand behind them. So basically, in a nutshell, I'm showing you how the book of Esther is called after Esther because Esther really does the victory all by herself. The plot is hers. In a 3-part program, she basically figures this out, and of course it has to work. And there's really more to say about this, but I think at this point we'll stop on Esther. This was Esther 5, and I think enough was said. And there's a lot really to say about this, also about the dates. The dates of the Megillah are very, very interesting. Because if you figure out the dates of the Megillah, it starts on Nisan, which is the month where the Jews become a people. That's when Haman draws the lots. Then, when he draws the lots, they're supposed to fall out on Adar, which is when Moses died, according to the Talmud. That's why he picks Adar. But, and remember, Nisan is when the Jews become a people because Moses took them out of Egypt, right? If it's the time when Moses died, that means they want to overthrow and overcome Moses, the guy who took them out of Egypt. And then when does the edict happen against the Jews? They receive it in the month of Tevet, which is the month when the siege around Jerusalem, the beginning of the destruction of the temple, meaning things are now going bad. It's like the temple's being destroyed. But then what happens is Mordechai is able to turn around the tie with Esther, and they send out a new edict. When do they send out the new edict? In the month of Sivan. That's the receiving of the Torah. Shavuot, the new edict is like receiving the Torah again, getting your life back. That's called Sivan. And then finally, what happens? That Haman is destroyed in Adar. Why Adar? He thought because Moses died in Adar, but the truth is Moses was born in Adar as well. And in our tradition, Masha Yahu Shiyeh, that Moses is, in other words, Hu Goel Rishon, Hu Goel Acharon, as the Zohar says in Tikkunei Zohar, that Moses is the first Redeemer and the final Redeemer who somehow shares a soul with Moses. So there's also a lot of hinting going on in these particular, let's say, dates, which are mentioned in the Megillah, which cannot be passed over when you look at the metaphors going on in this Megillah. Okay, thank you everybody for joining our 5-part series, and that's really